May I now introduce our second speaker, is Dr. Laura McVey, who is a Research Policy and Strategy Advisor for esafety Commission, and she has retained her affiliation with RMIT University. Laura will be delivering her presentation on women's marketplace, experiences, a lens for social change, and exploring the idea of choice or choicelessness in markets and marketing. Welcome, Laura.
Hello everyone, thank you so much, and Joy, what an incredible presentation. An intimidating act to follow, but that was such impressive and important work. So as Fuller introduced, my name is Laura. Before I start talking about women's marketplace experiences though, I do want to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people as the traditional owners of the land upon which we're meeting today here at RMIT. But appreciating there are people online as well, acknowledging all First Nations people for their continuing care of everything country encompasses: land, water and community. And I am actually speaking about my area of expertise, which is violence against women in markets and marketing. And I think it's really important to acknowledge from that lens that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women are leaders in working to combat the disproportionate levels of violence directed against them, their children and their families. And today I think when we're coming together to talk about kind of rethinking vulnerability, I do also want to acknowledge that First Nations people have led this country in helping us rethink family violence as going beyond just intimate partner violence, and I think are really leading the way on a lot of the topics around vulnerability that we've spoken about today. So I'd like to acknowledge that as well. So, clicker, here we go. As Fuller said, I am fortunate enough to work for the esafety Commissioner and have my PhD at RMIT, and I'm still affiliated with RMIT. So I'm actually going to be speaking today about the topic of my PhD, which was women's experiences and violence against women in the pornography market. So in coming to the session today, there we go. I was trying to think about how can I use what might seem like a unique context to really offer something that might be useful for the broad range of industry, academic and not-for-profit audiences we have here. And so in looking at social marketing, I think we understand that social harm and vulnerability is sort of increasingly being understood and addressed through helping empower people to make better choices for themselves. And critical marketers and social marketers, I think, already understand that this is problematic in some instances. Indeed, you all probably know this literature better than I do, but certainly we know that customers and consumers suffer choice overload, even to the point of choicelessness. But rarely challenged, even within these sort of more critical approaches, is the sort of macro influences that inform decision-making and choice-making for consumers and customers. So what does this have to do with the pornography market, and how can we kind of understand women's experiences in the pornography market through this? So while I think very impressive scholars, many of whom are probably amongst us today, understand that we need to move beyond a focus on individualisations and that societal level approaches are still really important in addressing social harm, both in our discipline and I think broadly across the academy. That idea of addressing social harm through individual approaches, as Joy mentioned, is still really common in policy, in practice and in academia. So when I think back on my PhD project, and in particular I was looking at women's experiences as like self-uploaders of content in a market that is known to be extremely violent and racist. And whether it's today's era where women are participating as self-uploaders of content, or in the decades in which pornography was being more traditionally made, a common defence of the violence and inequality that women suffer in this market is, but what about the women who choose? And what I would say is that it's not that individual choice is immaterial. It's certainly not immaterial to me, and nor was it to the project, but the choice of individual women is immaterial to how this market and many markets function. So in the pornography market in particular, we're talking about a market that is driven by distribution channels that deny women any chance at recourse if they change their mind. It also deprives them of any control over how, where, or how often their image is reproduced. So choice becomes this sort of tool of the market that it erases, if you like, any concerns around the economic inequalities and the ethical issues around production and distribution. So how do we kind of take this lens on choice and looking at more structural conditions and apply it to other learnings or other contexts? And what I would say is that the problem with the dominant focus on individual choice is that it fails to sort of meaningfully account for those structural conditions that place restraints on women's individual choices, and it erases an understanding of structural inequality. So instead of asking about the choices of individuals, in this case individual women, but I think we could apply that to any individual as consumers or clients, instead of asking about their choices, I would argue we need to look at the conditions under which those choices are being made. And I think Joy's example of women living on Thursday Island and the sort of choices they have is a really good example of that. So this discourse of choice, I would say, can also be considered a tool of some markets because it individualises every case and removes any recognition that there's a collective sense of oppression or inequality happening for groups of people. So I did, because of the topic today being about moving from deficit to strength and from problems to solutions, I did want to try and finish on something a little bit hopeful because this is a little bit of a dark topic. So I hope in reflecting on kind of the years of radical feminist research that has looked at the experiences of women in this market and women's inequality, what we can see is that when we transform private, personal experiences into more societal and systemic problems, then we're able to identify a collective struggle. And through identifying collective struggles, we're able to more collectively rise up and struggle against it. And I hope that that's what we're all beginning to do here today, bringing together our varied opinions. Thank you so much.